You want weapons? What a library! Books! Best weapons in the world! The 10th Doctor! Yay. That's one of my favorite quotes. I thought that would be an appropriate way to start off this video since this rotation's theme is books. I was going to do the challenge and talk at the same time, and that just didn't work at all. So I think tomorrow I'm going to go back and record that and then upload that as a video response. I thought I would take this topic in probably quite different direction than how most people will interpret it. I'm not going to just list off some of my favorite books, which while I find that very interesting to hear everybody else's, I did kind of just do that, and I'll put a link to that down in my pants. I thought instead I would talk about why I really love books, and especially fantasy books, because those are some of my favorite. And a lot of what I say can also apply to other forms of fiction, particularly, so, but mostly I'm focusing on fantasy. So, yeah. A lot of people think of fantasy as a children's genre, and that it's not to be taken as serious literature, which I profoundly disagree with. I personally feel that fantasy is much more valuable and important the older you get than when you're young, because when you're young, you don't need help seeing things with wonderment and imagination and everything, because, yeah. Anyway, that's not really what I want to talk about, though. What I want to talk about is that a lot of times I hear people think of fantasy as just being escapist, which while fantasy does have value in its escapism, like, it allows you to get away from your everyday world, which may kind of suck, into another world, which, if you think about it, may actually also kind of suck, but at least, hey, fun, adventure, bravery, heroism, all that great Gryffindor values! I'm a Gryffindor, I'm prejudiced, I know, but anyway, those are pretty typical of a lot of fantasy books. And while, yeah, there's some really awful, horrible fantasy that's not even good for escapism, then there's some kind of more mediocre fantasy that, okay, it's good for escapists, but then you forget about it within a couple months, maximum, you can't even remember half the names and stuff. Like, when I think of something like that, I think of, like, The Inheritance Cycle, which I greatly enjoyed reading the first 3 books, and I intend to read the 4th book whenever that comes out. But I don't really remember much about it. It didn't change my life. It didn't change any, in, like, to any degree, whereas stuff that I really love all do that. They all make you see the world differently. And see, one of the important things when you read a fantasy book, yes, you escape into this other world, it's all cool and stuff, but then you have to come back to your world. And with more mediocre fantasy books, you just come back, that's it, okay, that was a fun story, you forget about it. But with really, really good fantasy books, you come back and you're different because you've learned something. You see the world differently or more clearly, or see someone else's point of view better, which is one of the really valuable things of all books, especially fiction books. But it's something that can often be, in my opinion, better achieved through fantasy because you're already being asked to accept things different from how your everyday reality is. So it's then sometimes easier to accept something else. Like, you're being asked to accept the existence of magic. It then might be easier to accept something like the power of love. Best fantasy, really the best books of all. Most of what I'm saying can apply to any kind of book. But the best changes you, and it inspires you, and you can sometimes see things, be like, oh, I see that, I do that, that's not really good, and it allows you to see how consequences of things can happen. Since I opened with a quote, I will then leave with 2 of my favorite quotes that pertain to what I'm talking about. First one is a quote from J.K. Rowling, and that is, "We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better." And the second one is by G.K. Chesterton, and that is, "Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us dragons exist, but because they tell us the dragons can be beaten." See you at the after party!